Okay, so it's 10:30. I just wanted to wait until the official start time. But I just wanted to introduce myself. My name's Mike Wagner. I work for the Maurice A. Dean School of Law at Hofstra University. And our talk today is about responsive web design through iteration. Just wanted to give a little bit of a background as far as where I'm from. The Hofstra Law School is just a little bit east of New York City, and we have approximately 850 students and a whole variety of other staffs about the school. I've been at Hofstra since actually 1998, so I go back quite a ways. Began doing graphic design for the school back in '98, and in 2000, the university had just launched a new version of the website. It's actually interesting listening to Jason's keynote. Going back to the very first version of Hofstra.edu, the school had tulips across the top of the website as the navigation. Imagine a site from like the mid-90s. And so it's kind of fun to go back on the Wayback Machine and see how the Hofstra site started. And my brother, who attended Hofstra, was actually the person who set up the first web server there. So it's kind of going all the way back. But back in 2000, I switched over to work on web. And then I've been working specifically for the law school on campus since 2006. So it's been a long run, but it's a great place to work. And right now I'm working within the communications department at the law school. Part of the talk today is this idea of doing responsive design, and we're doing implementing the responsive design all in-house. And often I wonder when I go to other presentations and I hear about projects, I often wonder, well, how large is the staff? Some of the projects seem really ambitious. Our staff, though, we have 4 administrators. We're a very small department. I'm the sole person at the law school that's dedicated to doing web. And the other folks in our department, we have a director of communications that oversees all of the operations. Our associate director of publications also does all of our editing and copy editing. And then our creative director does all of our print design. So we're a very, very small shop. But we're one of, I believe it's 10 schools on campus. So there's also a main university web development team that we partner with on larger projects. But the day-to-day operations and much of what I'm presenting on today is a project that we're doing entirely in-house. And we maintain a wide variety of websites, but the 3 main sites that we maintain, law.hofstra.edu. It runs on a CMS called Cascade. It's made by a company called Hannon Hill. We've been using that product at the university since I believe it's 2004. And it's great. It's highly customizable. It works incredibly well. Right now, all 3 of the sites, the server is up on the Amazon CloudFront, and the university maintains that end of it. But what we're talking about in terms of responsive design is primarily the first site on Cascade. The other 2 sites, Law News and Law Events. Law News uses WordPress. To do a news site, it just made more sense to use WordPress. Our university, they also have a news site running on WordPress, so we're mirroring their setup. And then events, we've originally had all of our events within Cascade, but it just wasn't as flexible as we'd like. So we started using a product called Helios about a year ago, and we found it to be phenomenal. So between those 3 sites, it keeps us busy day in, day out, year in, year out. But as far as our talk today, I just wanted to give an overview, start off with that, a little bit of an overview of responsive design, talk a little bit about what we've done in the past, talk a little bit about some of the responsive frameworks that we've looked at and the one that we're using, discuss some of the templates that we've built out, our workflow, some more future plans, and at the end, a little bit of Q&A. But just before I jump into the overview, how many folks here are using a responsive design on their site? Okay, so only a handful. Okay, interesting. So about a year ago, last summer, we decided we wanted to try to take our website that was designed primarily for desktop and to make it responsive. And so looking up on Wikipedia, the whole term, the term responsive web design actually goes back to 2010, and a great website, A List Apart. So Ethan Marcotte wrote an article about it, and this whole idea of you could have one site that scales for any device. It sounds great in theory, and it is great, but it does take some doing to implement. And our previous redesign, we did a substantial redesign between 2010 and 2012. We launched in March of 2012. We partnered with an outside consulting company, M. Stoner. They were incredibly helpful. So our previous site had a lot of pages that hadn't been updated in a while. The content wasn't structured as well. And working with a consulting company back then was really helpful. We were able to basically go through the entire site. So we had actually a Google Doc spreadsheet of every single page on the site. We analyzed it. What pages hadn't been updated in a year, flag those. What pages hadn't been viewed in a year, flag those. And we began to really pare down the content that we're going to keep. We spoke with each department. We asked them to review their content. We let them know what we were going to be shutting off. And so back when we launched in 2012, we have a really well-organized site in terms of the infrastructure, in terms of the information architecture. And so that really set us up well for where we are right now. And again, last summer, we started thinking about this idea of going with the responsive design. And with the responsive design, there's all different strategies that you can use. You can certainly create your own responsive design, not using any type of a framework. And initially, one of the initial projects I worked on, I actually wrote my own framework, essentially. But as you can imagine, we start using different browsers and getting things to display consistently across all the browsers. There are definitely some hiccups. So after some initial testing, we decided to look into different frameworks. And there are a lot of frameworks that are out there. We looked primarily at three: Foundation, Skeleton, and Bootstrap. And there's a great chart that gives a little comparison of all the different frameworks and what they do. So let's switch over to that. So it gives you a complete breakdown of everything that each framework does. But one of the things I found interesting is when it was last updated. So you can see in the far right column, Skeleton, last time they released an update was 2012. So that wasn't a good sign. And then between Bootstrap and Foundation, our main university, they have their own templates, their own separate site, so we're independent of that. They elected to use Foundation. So I began looking at Foundation. I found it really easy to use, and we decided we'd start off with trying to use the Foundation framework. And what that does, as far as using a framework, it just gives you a really strong templating system right out of the box. They have a really cool logo. That's important. And so when we started looking at Foundation, one thing we found was the grid that Foundation has is very, very flexible. You can do a lot with it. And then in addition to that, all the different tools that are built into the framework, something as simple as creating a slideshow that actually is responsive right out of the box without having to do any more customizing, they have a tool for that. It's called Orbit, and it works really well. We're using it currently on our homepage. And their documentation site, I personally found to be a great resource. So if you were to think this sounds great, I'd like to try using it, you could download Foundation right from the site. You could use it with CSS or with SAS. And there's all different features. Something I'm interested in implementing, but we haven't yet, is this idea of a side menu. So something like we see on Facebook nowadays. So in order to implement something like that, the code base is pretty simple. It's an unordered list. You wrap it with a certain tag, and then so on and so forth. You end up with a menu that slides out. And what's great is that essentially it works cross-browser. You don't have to worry about doing a lot of testing. And so as we've begun using the framework more, we've really found it to be very reliable and really, really well developed. And then kind of fun pages, there's a kitchen sink page. So kind of on one long page, you can see all the different facets of the template. Oops. So there's all different built-in functions, and we start with a stock template, and then from there, I'm involved working with our creative director, Toby. She'll create the design, and then I'll write the CSS to make the design work on the web. And so Foundation overall, we've just found to be a great framework for us. And we've run into very, very few hiccups, which has been good. I actually was out probably about a month ago out in San Francisco at an HTML5 conference. And there's a fellow there giving a presentation, very articulate. And he was describing how the company he was consulting for, he required all the developers to not use any frameworks at all. Everything had to be written in-house, custom code. And it sounded really interesting because with the framework, you use some of it, and then you end up not needing some of it, so you end up with a lot more functions than you really are using. So if you write it custom, you could write just specifically what you need. And I just think that's great, but I think the company, as he was describing it, had roughly 100 developers. So with 100 developers, cool, yeah, dig in, man, write that custom code, great. Back at where I'm from, I'm the webmaster. I'm a one-person web team, and I'm very, very fortunate to be able to collaborate with the University Web Development Department. They're a great group. I worked there earlier on. And so I do have resources on campus, but it's a really small shop. So using a framework is really been a lifesaver. So in terms of templates, so we like this idea of using Foundation, and so we wanted to start checking out the templates. So on the Foundation site, they have a template page, and they've all these pre-built templates. And actually, I think this was the first one I started with, where it's just a stock grid and has a menu bar across the top of the screen. Everything's already built where there's drop-down menus. And so we started with this template and began modifying it. And more recently, we started using another designer had set up a code pen where you could really easily test out code all on the web, modify the HTML, add your own CSS. So the templates I'm building now, I'm actually working, this past week, we've begun working on our alumni section and a custom landing page for them. I've really found this code pen site to be really useful. The presentation, by the way, I uploaded to the Cali site, so you could download it, and you have all the links in there. And I was going to do some live coding, but occasionally that doesn't go well during demos. So I decided not to be that ambitious. But CodePen is kind of fun. Actually don't have to download anything to your computer. You can just look at the documentation site, cut and paste code into here, and you begin to see how it alters the layout on the fly. And that's been really helpful for developing. And so back in 2012, we partnered with M. Stoner. They came up with a wonderful design for our homepage and our site, but it was designed specifically for desktops. And so you can imagine the size of the image that we're using in this design. It works fairly well on a desktop, but when you go to load that same page on a mobile phone, it didn't exactly load quickly, and it ran into a lot of challenges, shall we say. So as we saw more and more users coming from mobile devices, we decided let's try to redesign it. And we decided we'll use a framework, we'll do it in-house. And so we took that same design and created a new template. On the right side, or left side for you, is the desktop version. And then that same page, if you look at it on a smartphone, it displays, scales everything down. And there are a lot of subtle things going on that make the mobile version work better. For one, Foundation has a piece of code or a tool within it called Interchange, and it allows you to load different sets of code. So the slideshow on the home page uses one set of images that are larger and one set of code. The slideshow on the mobile site uses images that are optimized for that size, and it loads just that code. It doesn't load everything and then just turn off display on items. So we've worked a lot on trying to make sure our mobile site loads quickly and works well. And then little, again, subtle things, the statistic that's in a circle, the 8 concentration areas, on the mobile site we're not loading the stat. So you can, on a per box item, you can decide what loads on mobile, what loads on desktop, tablet, and so on. So you can get really, really quite granular with what you can display. And that's worked incredibly well for us. And small things like on the mobile site, the menu tool that's built in, we're able to use the same tool, Interchange, to load a different menu depending on what site, what screen size we're viewing the site on. And this was the first template that we decided to tackle. And it took a few months, tweaked the design, went back and forth. Right now it's actually a little bit simplified. This is the site that's up as of yesterday. And once we roll around to September, we'll add our events listing for the following year. And not to get into all the technical details behind the scenes, but with Cascade, a lot of the work that I did once we had a template design ready is this is all built right into the CMS. So if we want to add another row, anyone on our team can do it. They could add another row, they could drop in images. So each row is essentially you can add and remove, and there are about 5 different row designs that we're using right now. And so to edit a responsive site, it's possible for an end user with no HTML coding, nothing elaborate. They're able to edit and maintain the site. And so that side is a little bit more time consuming to write, but it's really made the site very, very useful for us. So once we came up with a design for the home page, about 90% of the pages on our site use a standard template. So the interior page originally designed specifically for the desktop. This is what our About index page looked like before, and we then converted it over to Foundation, and we're using a different design. Looks like some of the lines aren't showing up, but this same page, it loads based on the device. A variety of things happen on it. Some of the items move down on the page, and this new standard template is what we're working on rolling out. So the idea of responsive design by iteration, our website is about 1,000 pages, give or take right now. Just law.hofstra.edu, that's excluding the news site and the event site. And so technically we can make one change to the system and push the template live on every page that uses that template. But what we're doing is we're using a process where we're redesigning and launching one section at a time. So with a small department, we're able to go in and look at each section and analyze it. So after we've created the home page, an About section typically is a smaller section. So we worked on that next and launched it and used it to kind of work the kinks out. And that worked out fairly well. And so we began developing a workflow. So when we partnered with M. Stoner, the whole site cleanup process is really, really helpful. So we have a pretty solid information architecture on our site. But what we do is when we decide to begin working with a section, we'll start by reviewing the information architecture. And so our alumni section, as an example, there are a couple of quirks to how the architecture was set up. So the very first thing we do is we make sure everything is structured well. If we need to add any pages, remove any pages, do anything to the folder structure, page structure, we do that first. And after we do that, we're able to change the template file, which changes the design. And then we have a number of custom blocks within the design that we can modify. So if we were to go back a step, the images that show up, they're actually an image bank. So I think this image bank has about 20 images. It's specific to the About section, and it randomly loads an image out of that bank. We have a statistics widget that right now we're using one bank of stats across all of the standard pages, and the home page uses a specific different set of stats. And we're able to then modify what blocks show up. And that usually does it as far as migrating to the new template. But occasionally in the main body content section of the page, occasionally there's something quirky about what was there before, and it just doesn't scale well once you reduce the screen size down to a mobile screen. So occasionally we do have to go in and make some fixes. Little quirks, there's always little quirks. We have some pages that just use line breaks instead of paragraph tags. So because of how the CSS is set up, the page doesn't display quite right. So we go in and we just do some minor code updates. But the process is relatively painless. Once all of that work on the template's done, migrating from one template to the next has gone very, very smoothly for us. So after we make all the modifications, we have a separate server, a staging server, that will publish the site out for review. That way the department can look at it. Preferably they can give feedback, and we can make any further adjustments. So once our latest site, that being alumni, once that's ready to go, we'll send it out for review. And when the department says everything looks great, we can go live. If anyone in the room maintains websites at their school, you might realized there might be a hiccup to this process. And the hiccup, and it's happened with the alumni section, is, well, everything's converted to a new template. They haven't quite given the okay, and we still are working on a landing page for the alumni department. What happens if they need an update? They don't want the new template design to go live. And the way our CMS is set up, it's all controlled by one file, essentially the template file. So we can swap that back and forth. And so for us, that hasn't created too sizable of an issue. And so we're able to swap the template back, republish, and then switch it back. We did a big update for the alumni class notes, and actually we decided to use the new template. So if someone were to drill down into the Hofstra website, into alumni, and go into stay connected in class notes, you would see the new template is live on those pages. But we're able to manipulate what displays in the site fairly easily. And so that part's worked really well for us. And as far as what sections we worked on, I mentioned earlier we started with the About section. And I listed this alphabetically, although we did it in a slightly different order. Admissions, as you can imagine, admissions is an important section for any school. We actually did that second. And the home page of admissions actually uses the same template as the overall home page, but we're just using one row design where it's a grid of 3 boxes. So our admissions page is now a grid, a 3x3 grid. And when you scale it down to mobile, everything scales very gracefully. And so we worked on admissions, and that was a pretty large site. And then giving and student life, they were manageable. Took a little bit of doing to do those. But our largest section by far so far has been academics. So the academic section encompasses, I think it's the largest section. Pretty sure it's the largest section on our site. And so we went through and modified the template on a page-by-page basis. Technically, that can be done programmatically. You can actually write a script to go in and make all of those changes. But I guess almost circling back to Jason's keynote of having like a person actually look at each page and actually physically interact and check, we found that to be critical, especially when you switch from what's primarily a desktop design to make it responsive to mobile. Really want to make sure you're just seeing, does everything work as you'd expect? So we had at least 2 pages so far that had really long URLs that end up they'd stretch off the screen and basically break the design slightly. So small things like that can make a very polished design seem a little bit glitchy. So going through and actually checking each page, as tedious as it is, has been really important. And now that we're into the summer, occasionally I get asked by someone outside of the school, I'll say, how's it in the summertime? Is it really easy? Is it like, do you have the summers off? And as an administrator, obviously, no, the summers off. And as someone that works for doing web and I also oversee video production, the summer is the time for the big projects, right? Everyone kind of see a lot of heads nodding around the room. And so, our ambitious summer project this summer is to migrate the rest of the section. So we'll all be on one template. So alumni, as I mentioned, we're working on. And then the other sections, current students and faculty and staff, they're all audience-based pages. So we're working on doing an overall design for those. Centers and clinics will largely use our standard interior page, and the directory, that should be fun. There are definitely a few faculty members that have customized directory pages, so there's going to be a few challenges there. But our plan is to migrate everything over to the new template before the beginning of the school year, that being mid-August. And then once we've migrated everything over, we have ideas and plans on what we'll do next. So One of the challenges of working with a consulting company, it's great to have the additional resources, you're able to accomplish a lot, but a lot of what ends up occurring is what's set up is sometimes set up so specifically that it's really hard to modify. Right, so we had a really great design, we loved it, but once we started thinking about making it flexible and work for mobile, we really had to make a lot of changes to the front end, the back end that M. Stoner set up. We really haven't made any changes to it, so it's really set up very well. But what we're able to do now with using a framework is we can change a specific piece. So there's again, anyone involved with a law school website, the header and the global navigation as far as what links show up at the top of the page, it's always a fun discussion. And actually, it's rarely a fun discussion, but it's a challenge. But we could actually change that independent of everything. And there's discussions right now of changing the information architecture next year. So once we're done with launching a new template site-wide. Next year, we're going to talk about modifying the information architecture. And once we do that, we're able to push changes live to a specific section and a specific piece to the page, in that case, the header. Our news site, so in the past year, we switched over to using WordPress for our news site, lawnews.hofstra.edu, and why don't you bring that up? So one thing we realized is once we built out a separate news site, the traffic that the news site gets is amazing. The stats, the amount of time that people are engaged on the site has been phenomenal. And it uses it's a WordPress template. It is responsive. It scales down to mobile. Our Associate Director of Publications, Ken is pumping out the content every week. So he works together with Andrew Berman, our director, and continually writing and posting articles. All the articles are tagged, so these are some of the top tags. And it's great because all of that information is really, really well structured. And so any of the tags, we could pull in that content through RSS. And so one of our goals is in our new design is to actually pull in above the footer 4 news articles related to that section. So when you're an alumni, you see the 4 most recent alumni articles. Same with faculty, current students, and so on. And so being able to just plug in a specific, let's just refer to it as a widget into the page is, I think, another strong part about using a template as part of frameworks, because it's really easy to plug different pieces in and take different pieces out. And so that's going to be a really nice improvement. And then basically fully integrating that with Cascade, the end result will be each section, you'll be able to fill in a field, which will be the RSS feed that you're pulling in, and then it'll automatically display that at the bottom of all of the pages in that section. Notice I said that in about 2 sentences. There's a little bit of work involved in setting that up though, but that's part of the fun of being involved with websites. And then the third item, it sounds really vague, clean up the HTML code. So our web development group on campus, they host a weekly web development meeting. And so there's the web development side, the guys that do all the programming and back-end work, the interactive media group, they oversee Hofstra.edu, so all of the undergraduate sites, all of the graduate program sites. We have a separate medical school, so someone from that group comes over. Our undergrad and grad admissions group, they have someone dedicated to the web. They show up, and so we go to these meetings. And so recently we had this pretty lively debate about how responsive design really requires a lot of additional code on a page. So anyone that did web design back in the late 90s, a lot of designs use tables, right? You have table rows, table cells, you could slice up images, you could go that route. And if you actually look at the underpinnings of any of the responsive frameworks, there's a lot of div tags. There's a div for each row, which is the row, and then there's a separate div for each column. And all of those tags are essentially displayed on the page. And so it begins to get very, very tailored. And Jason mentioned in the keynote this idea of products having like a 2-year life cycle on the web. And so maybe responsive design, it's already been out for about 4 years now, and it's definitely kind of crested. And I think one of the presentations later during the conference is about SPA frameworks or single page applications. So that's really, in many ways, the next wave. And so if we take our site and we keep making it responsive, the worry is we're going to have all this code that only works well with this specific framework. And so Zerb, the company, they send out weekly emails. They sent out an email probably about 2 months back, and it was about how you can use SAS, which is a variation on CSS, to basically take a page with no fancy div and row or any of that. Just use standard HTML5 tags, header, section, article, aside, footer, put an ID for each of them if you need to. And then using SAS, you could write in all of the responsive code. And so that begins to get a little bit technical, but from my perspective, what that will allow us is moving forward, we won't have the HTML code will be very, very clean. It'll load faster, and doing everything with SAS will allow us to make the site even more flexible. So looking at all the great, in the keynote, or the beginning, before the keynote, all the great swag that they're offering, right? We saw that wonderful watch that Samsung is making now, a little thin strip, and there's all, I'm very much into using Macs and Apple computer products, and there's all this continued hype about this idea of an iWatch coming out, right? So maybe that'll come out, maybe it won't. I have a friend that works for Apple. He'll never tell me anything. But you think, eventually if the idea of displaying data on your wrist becomes more and more popular, how is your site going to be ready to do that? So the cleaner the HTML code is, the more flexible it will be for us. And so that's something we're beginning to look at. And then the other part, which we've been debating at home at the university, is as you're trying to get your site to display well across all these devices, you're essentially adding more and more code to the page. And just kind of basic fact of life, the more code you have, the more file size there is, right? And so there's a criticism of a presentation at a local conference that there's a little bit of a misrepresentation about responsive design. That responsive design, it allows your site to be flexible, but you end up having code for all the different views, all displayed on one page. So it ends up being really, really massive. And so I mentioned the different tools that Foundation has. One of them is Interchange. And Interchange, when I initially looked at it, it allows me to load different images, right? So if I'm on mobile, I can load a mobile size image. If I'm on a desktop, I can load a desktop size image and so on. But what that same tool also does is it allows you to load different sets of code. So your entire page can, instead of loading all of the code to display all of the different sizes, you can load just the code you need for the device you're on. And I don't know if we'll get there in the upcoming year, switching over to that type of a model. But looking ahead, I do believe that's going to be important because statistically, I haven't looked up the stat recently, but this idea of, if your web page doesn't load, I think the last time I read is 3 seconds, right? If your web page doesn't load within 3 seconds, the likelihood the person's going to move on is pretty significant. And I imagine with all of our schools, we're recruiting a much wider audience, even a global audience. So if you're, depending on where you are in the world and you're trying to find out about the school, find out information, having a site that loads quickly and efficiently is all the more important. And for us, we're heavily focused on making sure it loads well on mobile. So this idea of using different code sets and swapping it out is definitely something I'm pretty keen on experimenting with. And so that last step, there's some chatter at home about doing an additional design or a revised design for our homepage in the upcoming year. And so that's something I'm very interested in trying out on the homepage. And with that, just wanted to leave plenty of time if anyone has any questions. In the beginning, I asked who around the room is using a responsive design, and just saw a few hands go up. But does anyone have any questions? Yes.
Has changing to the responsive design improved your SEO? I guess your number of people that find the site.
Oh, we've noticed from an analytics standpoint that the traffic is going up, and the number we're most interested in is also how many more users are coming from either tablet or a smartphone, and we're seeing increases there. And so that's definitely something we're actively looking at. As far as search engine optimization in terms of ranking, that's actually a good question. The university as a whole is undertaking a process where they're actually rewriting URLs and changing the way the page names are written to make the site more search engine friendly. When we did our redesign with M. Stoner, they were really uptight about how we wrote the folder names. And so a lot of our existing structure is heavily optimized for search engines. So right now we're in a good position, but that's an ever-changing landscape, right? It's always changing up. So that should be interesting to see. That's actually something I've begun reading more about as you're doing these different designs, having it load different ways in different devices. How does that impact your search engine optimization? And that's something I admittedly don't know enough about, but I'm very interested in. And what's your experience?
No, in general, or I guess
with search engine optimization.
Well, I think it would be better because, like, I think in terms of simplifying the code to make it easier to search. If you have things in, like, if you're relying on tables to do your formatting, it tends to be more difficult to parse the page.
Yeah, that's actually a good point. So the cleaner the code is, the HTML code on the page, the easier it is for a search engine to crawl your site. That's actually a really good point. Yeah. So that's all the more reason to try to go that route in the upcoming year. And the nice part about how, on our end, how we're building everything from a technical standpoint, we have all this information stored in the content management system. How we write it out to the page, though, we use XSL, which is a programming language. So these XSL formats control how everything is displayed. So if we want to change how it displays, as far as whether we're using div tags or instead using section tags, by changing the XSL code and doing a republish, we can rewrite all of our pages site-wide. I'm not that brave, though, to do site-wide change. I really do like doing it section by section. And I've just been in, let's say, in the game long enough to realize that, site-wide is kind of, on rare occasions. So other questions? A few other hands.
So with all the tablets on the market with different sizes and different aspect ratios, do you still run into issues with some of the kind of weirder sized ones where the CSS doesn't look properly?
Yes, and I wish I didn't include a picture, but it's making me think of a picture of a presentation I was reading online where it was a company that specializes in developing for mobile. So they had a table in their conference room, and I don't know if it was 45 different devices, but somewhere in that range that they use for testing. So if you're going to really, and I can only imagine what my director would say if I said I wanted to buy all these devices. Our web development team at the university, they have a fairly large number of devices, not 45, but a lot. But yeah, we are seeing some quirks, and occasionally, even with older browsers, we had one hiccup where the font, we use a font called Lato, and it wasn't rendering on a very specific type of PC, with a very specific scenario. And so that's on the checklist at home. It's still working, it's figuring that one out. But yeah, we are occasionally seeing issues, but this process of iteration, of continually making changes, each time we go through the process, or each time I write a new set of CSS and modify it, it's just getting better and better and better. And the end result is it's much, much more consistent. And so, overall, it's working fairly well. But I thought I read is 1,500 is the number I read probably 6 months, 8 months back. There's 1,500 different screen sizes out there. So, how do you design for 1,500 different screen sizes with a responsive design where it's fluid? Essentially, it'll display any screen size. But as far as what's above the fold or what's on the initial screen, that's something that's pretty darn hard to control, in that type of environment. Yeah. But that's a great question, though. Yeah. But 45 different devices, that'd be fun. Other questions? Yeah.
You mentioned that with the new design, you noticed substantial increase in visits. And you also said that you noticed that user interaction and engagement was very also increased. How did you measure that?
Google Analytics. So we're specifically using Google, but the visitor engagement part we're specifically seeing on our news site. At our university, they have a separate news site, news.hofstra.edu. They're seeing the same thing, that visitor engagement, once someone comes to the news site, they're there and they interact much longer. And so doing a separate news site has really been truly a boon in terms of getting increased traffic both on the news site and then also the links back to our site. So we're seeing incoming links from the law news subdomain back to law. And then in addition to that, as far as just getting eyes on the news site, so every week we send out the communications department, our director, Andrew, sends out an email newsletter with the 5 most recent news articles. And every week we have at least 5 new articles. And it's typically, or more than 5 technically, but we try to do one alumni article, one faculty article, and so on. And there's some talk down the road perhaps about doing targeted content specifically send out just to alumni and so on. So in terms of getting engagement, that's what we're seeing. Does that answer your question?
That is, I know about the quantitative, that is how many visitors,
Sure.
And which page, got this visit. I'm just the concept of engagement and interaction, trying to get, a handle on how do you really, is it interactive that you ask questions, the site responds to that, or just a concept of engagement?
So how a user interacts with your site. So our previous site, before we switched to the responsive design, you could view it on a smartphone, but if you tried to click on something, boy, was it tricky. And I forget if it's 40 pixels by 40 pixels, something like that. It says the minimal clickable size, for an average size finger to click on a touch screen. And so I've been on sites before where you go to try to just navigate it, and it just ends up being so frustrating that it's just, oh, well, I'm not going to bother doing that, or I'll wait till I get to a desktop computer. But, you know, it just, I always love walking around campus and the number of students carrying their smartphone around doing something as we're walking around is amazing. And a great project, unrelated specifically to the law school, but at Hofstra, the university's invested a lot of resources into developing a pretty phenomenal campus map. And they partnered with a company called Campus Bird. And this summer there's chatter about doing a lot of point-to-point navigation. So if you want to go from wherever you are on campus and find a specific location, they're working on modifying that map to do that. So as far as getting users to engage and find the device more usable, that's definitely something that's an ongoing effort. As far as web content, one thing we noticed is if a page, when it scales down for responsive, it ends up being like 10 screens of text. Who's going to read it? So that's something that we have a challenge on. Definitely the higher level pages, we're trying to tailor the content more for the screen size. Our editor is working a lot on breaking up the content into smaller paragraphs to make it more readable. And so we're experimenting a lot with that. So yeah. Other questions? Yes.
Do you use any automated testing tools to check that things are working properly as you roll out big changes across the whole site?
I would love to. We're currently not. I know Browser Stack is a very popular tool to use. The product that we use, Cascade, they have a wonderful conference every year down in Georgia. They videotape all the lectures, and there's a number of folks there. There's actually someone out at UC Davis, their School of Law.
That's where I'm from.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, so what are you guys doing for testing? I know you're...
Jason is trying to set up an environment for that. We're doing redesign right now. He's doing incorporating responsive. And he's got a development environment where, testing is a part of it, but we haven't really gotten off the ground with doing it yet. So I was just curious if anyone else is doing it so we can pick your brain.
Yeah, we do what I guess is fairly low tech, which is this real world testing.
Sure.
Where we'll actually ask users to try the different sections out, and the feedback that we get is invaluable, really. But there are some really phenomenal tools out there that you can use to automate that process. And with using that type of environment, when you tried it and test, what type of feedback does it give you?
What type of feedback does the automated tool give? Generally, you've got a console that has red messages on it.
Okay.
So you did something bad.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely think that's going to become more and more essential because the environment that we're developing for is becoming increasingly complex, right? All these different devices.
Right.
And be able to make sure and ensure that everything works consistently. This summer we looked at one product, but right now, cost-wise, it's a little bit of a challenge. But the product that we looked at was phenomenal, the feedback that we got from it. Even something as simple as link checking and spell checking across the site and listed what the tools can pull in is pretty impressive. So using an automated testing tool is something I'd like to have the option of doing down the road, but that hasn't occurred as of yet. Next question.
I just wanted to piggyback on that. I just started playing with a tool called Casper.js that's really useful for automated testing. So it's basically a version of WebKit, so it's really only testing in Chrome. It's not really good for cross-browser, but it's a headless browser, so you don't actually see the browser, and it injects itself into a web page that you load up. And you can define your test in JavaScript. It's all in JavaScript. And you can tell it to test at different viewports. So if you're testing specifically for your responsive, you can test to see, use jQuery to say, is this thing on the screen? Is it above the fold? Is it where I want it to be on the page? Did it load properly? Things like that. It's a really powerful tool. And then you can use it with other tools like Grunt. So that as you're writing Sass or CSS or JavaScript, whatever you're doing, literally you can automate it to the point where as you save the file, it automatically refreshes and runs through all of your tests. So like every time you save a file, you're testing everything.
And that product is Casper.js?
Casper.js, it's an open source tool, and there's an equivalent one for Gecko-based browsers, so Firefox called Slimer.js.
I'm sorry, what's Slimer.js?
Slimer.js, Casper and Slimer. They goes I don't know of anything for IE because it's a proprietary browser, but who cares about IE?
Interesting, thank you. That sounds like a great tool.
Yeah, it's really useful.
Yeah. All right. Another question.
Sort of, it seems like a common thread getting going here. Along those lines, did you ever run into any accessibility issues with the responsive design or the framework adjusting things that broke screen readers or things along those lines?
Not that I'm aware of as of yet, but I wouldn't be surprised if we're going to run into that issue down the road. Making sure everything's handicap accessible and up to spec is something that it's an ongoing struggle. Right? And I think that the third item, as far as cleaning up the HTML and making the code leaner, I think would make it a lot better in terms of screen readers. And
Does the framework automatically put in alt tags or links if you limited them for some reason? Does it handle basic things like that pretty well, or?
No, it's something
it's all up to you.
that I'm doing with the XSL on the CMS end. Yeah, but it's a good question. Yeah, I a number of years ago met a few folks that one could see 3% out of one eye, which basically really could see barely light and dark, shade. And one was completely blind. It's a wonderful couple up in Canada, and I email them back and forth and keep in touch with them. But often, it's nice to think about like a real world person. It's not everyone isn't coming and seeing the site, so they're interacting with it in different ways. So I think that's an important question, but it's something that I don't have a good answer for right now. Other questions? Or time for one more? Okay.
I see you all chose Foundation for your framework. Are you able to talk to and compare Foundation with Bootstrap? Do you have any opinion as to which one is better or more useful?
When we're looking at those two in particular side by side, what ultimately we lean towards using Foundation mainly because the university as a whole was using Foundation. So in terms of support, longer term, we thought that was as far as Foundation versus Bootstrap. And it'd be interesting to see. It seems like it's a bit of a race between the two. I believe Bootstrap is still ahead technically.
Like Bootstrap.
Yeah, so you're using Bootstrap?
We do.
Yeah. And what's your experience so far?
It's excellent. They're just up a new version for Bootstrap 3. So you had to relearn some of the div classes and things like that. But it's very reliable in terms of responsiveness. Satisfied with it.
Good. So it sounds like a similar experience that we're having with Foundation. We initially when we started, we were with using the Foundation 4, and that was working fairly well. And when Foundation 5 came out, tested it out, and we ran into a few hiccups, but it was all very manageable. And so, using a supported product is great. So again, this idea that I mentioned in the beginning, if you had a team of 100 developers, go to town, custom write your code, go for it. But with smaller shops, using a framework, I highly recommend it. With that being said, I just wanted to thank everyone for coming to the lecture. Hopefully it was informative. If you have any questions, you're more welcome to email me, send me a tweet. I'll be around for the conference. I love discussing responsive design, something I'm really heavily invested in at home. And I'm looking forward to attending the rest of the presentations here. So thank you so much.
Yeah, he's actually doing it. Is he here? Yeah. He's sitting up there.
Your size tablets.
Yeah, have you seen those?
I know we're still growing. Yeah, I know it's not corporate mass. Actually, if you're there, you guys.